Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's short quick live session where we're going to be looking at a great shot from photographer Chris Van Riel in the Netherlands. You can see his Instagram link in the description of this on Facebook and YouTube. But I found his shot just while I was browsing Instagram the other day. Actually, let's put it on screen so you know what the heck I'm talking about. So I found some of his work on Instagram, really liked it, and I thought, I wonder how he does his editing. So we had a chat, and he's using a combination of Capture One and Photoshop and so on. But I wanted to see if I could kind of get close to his final result just using Capture One itself. So what I'm aiming to get is something probably along the lines of one of these. That's an edit from a few days ago. That's an edit from this morning, I think. And that's the original. So fantastic accent shot. Uses a bit of cloning, bit of healing, all kinds of stuff going on in layers and so on and so forth. So I was working on this, over a number of days, chatting backwards and forwards with Chris, getting his input as well. So I'm setting myself up for a slight fall trying to do it in 30 minutes flat, but let's see. I've just got to turn down my monitor over here because I can hear myself twice and that's going to be annoying and possibly for you. So let's get started. Right, so let's go back to this one. I'm going to hide my browser just so that we've got a bit more space. You can see the shot that I'm going to work with. This is straight out of camera, I think. Yep, because the reset button is grayed out. Good advert for tracking autofocus, definitely. If you're interested, I think this was a Sony A9, which would make sense, yep, for the animal tracking, and a 135mm lens. So as I said, I want to get to try and get close to the kind of result Chris was getting on his Instagram pages. So I've got notes, which is rare for me because I'd kind of normally do it from memory, but there's quite a lot of steps in this edit. So let's go. Right, so the first thing that I want to do, let's just make my layers panel a bit bigger because we're going to end up with lots of layers, is that I want to fill in a bit of area just above the dog here so that we have a uniform background. So first thing I'm going to do is just grab the clone tool like so, go over to my shot, excuse me, right click, and I'm going to make my brush nice and soft and relatively big, excuse me again, and just pick a spot where I can start cloning from. So a clone's just going to be a direct copy of pixels from one spot to another. Now to choose the spot, I have to hold down my Alt key, and I'm going to go somewhere around here, and then roughly kind of draw in a little bit of the background like so. Now I'm going to get to the point where I'm seeing a bit of dog, so I'm just going to move my spot a little bit like so, and that's probably going to be enough. And now if I go any more this way, then I'm going to end up with even more paws and dogs and things like that. So I'm going to choose myself another source point by option clicking, and then just fill in a little bit over here as well. Now it's a little bit darker obviously than it was before, so I could just bring the opacity down a little bit as well, but once I darken that area and play around with it a little bit more, then I don't think we're going to notice that line too much. But if I had more time, I might spend a bit more care just kind of cloning around those trees, but you don't want to watch me nitpick, I'm sure. Now the next thing we're going to do, we're going to see a bit of his head. So I just need to heal that out. I think would make more sense than cloning. Let's just name this layer adding trees, and if you have any questions along the way, don't forget to ask. So now I'm going to grab my heal brush and make this a little bit bigger with a right click, and let's just take out his head down here like so. So that's pretty good. Let's just add a bit more and bring this one up. So that's done a good job of hiding that area. So now I'm happy to crop and then start the rest of it. So that's the first stage. So I'm going to grab my crop tool. I want a square crop, so I'm going to right click and just choose square here in the drop down window. So that means Capture One will just keep the aspect ratio 1:1. And let's start a crop something like this, like so. So that's going to be good, I think. So now that's the shot that we're going to be working with. Fantastic. So we've got rid of a bit of the sky and we've got rid of our dude down the bottom here, because I think you can just see his head popping in like so, so we don't want that. And looking at my notes, the next thing we want to do is to kind of isolate the dog, because if we isolate the dog, then I've got a separate layer for my background, or I can also use that to create a layer from my background, so I can kind of play with those two independently as well. So what's the best way to mask the dog? I tried a few different techniques. I tried to auto mask, I sort of tried the color editor, but at the end of the day I found just doing a kind of a rough mask and refining it kind of did the best job. So I'm going to make a new layer and we're going to call this just dog, like so. Grab my brush and we're going to go in relatively smaller and closer. So let's zoom in a little bit on the pup. Maybe not that much, let's come out a bit and just sort of outline it. So we're not going to do anything fancy, I'm just going to draw around the outside. So if I right click, I want to make sure my flow is at 100 and press M on my keyboard to see the mask. So I'm just going to go roughly around the edge of our guy here. So let's just do that. And again, I'm not being super critical, because what I'm going to do to the background is just darken it, add a bit of a color tint and soften it as well. That's the plan, at least anyway. So let's just do that. So we've got an outline of our dog. Now to fill it in, easiest way to do that, right click and say fill mask, and then that will just fill it in like so. So we've got a rough mask of the dog. Now, as I said, that's pretty rough. Let's just fill in his chops around there. That is pretty rough, and I might be able to get away with that, but I don't think I will, because there's no finesse between, you know, his fur and the background. So what we can do is, if we zoom out a bit more, the best way to examine this is to turn on something called the grayscale mask. So what the grayscale mask will do will just show me the mask either in black or white or steps of grey. So as soon as I say display grayscale mask, we can now see the areas that I've masked. Not particularly finessed, of course. But what we can do is use a function called refine mask that will examine the underlying image, if you like, and help to hug the edges a little bit more. So if I right click and say refine mask, then we get a window pop up, and then we can go from anything to sort of no change. And then as I bring this up, you see it gradually pops in like so. So I want it to be, don't want it to be too accurate, but probably something like that is a good compromise. So that's just improved on my sort of rough work. So let's say apply and press M on my keyboard, and then now you can see where I've got my mask. So what this will do for me is just allow me to control the dog separately. Now he's a bit flat at the moment and a bit lacking in contrast. So what I want to do just for the dog is to crank up the clarity a little bit. So you see if I drag the slider, it's just happening on him. So I'm going to bring up the clarity a bit and also the contrast. And as it's nice and sharp, we can add a little bit of structure as well. Now the color of his fur isn't quite right and it's not going to match the background that I want to achieve. But we'll worry about that at the end. That's step 9, looking on my notes. So right now I'm just going to bump up the clarity and contrast a bit. So if we turn off just dog layer, that's before and that's after. So that's just crisping him up a little bit and seeing all that fantastic detail and everything. So that's good enough for now. I just saw a question flash by from Luigi. How can I go from brush and hand tool so fast? So all the cursor tools along the top here, they all have keyboard shortcuts. So H for hand tool, B for brush. Sorry, helps if you're on Capture One. H for hand tool, B for brush, and so on. If you want to look up any shortcuts, just go to Edit Keyboard Shortcuts, and you can see exactly what does what. So if I type in brush, for example, I can see various different brush commands there. If I type in mask, then you can see clear mask, draw mask, cursor tools, draw mask, and so on. So very easy to find those different things. But good question, great. David, you must be looking at my notes, which are on the left of me. If I copied the mask on a new layer, inverted it, then I'd have the background. Absolutely. So that is what we are going to do next. So we're going to make a new layer, and we're going to call this background soften and color grade, like so. Now we've already got the dog. So as David says, who's peeking at my notes, we can already use that and just flip it. So if we right click and say copy mask from just dog, like so. So that's just giving me the same mask again. Now if I say right click and say invert mask, that's just going to flip it. So now we've got our background, like so. So what I want to do on this background, first of all, is to darken it a little bit and also throw in a bit of a color grade as well. So to darken it, I'm just going to bring down the brightness somewhat, like so. So that's just, now if we go all the way down and if we bring exposure down, then we can obviously see what our mask looks like. So it's not perfect, but it doesn't need to be because we're not actually cutting something out. So I'm going to bring that down, and then we're going to use the color balance tool to just put in a bit of a cooler tint. I was trying to kind of reference off, if you look at the edit Chris has done on his Instagram, then you'll see what I was trying to get to. I mean, Chris is far more talented than me in Photoshop, so he was doing a lot of Photoshop to get to this, but my challenge was to try and do the same in Capture One. So we want a bit of a cooler tint in shadows and midtones as well, something like that. Now to soften it, because we've got all the water spray, which you could agree you might like or may not like, but I'd noticed Chris had softened it a little bit as well, so I wanted to see how I could do that. And there really is only kind of one way to do that in Capture One, is with clarity and structure. There is no blur tool, but I thought, how would clarity, if I just put these both to -100, how it works? And it actually does not a bad job. Now we could decide how far you wanted to go with that. Like, do you like seeing the water droplets or do you not? But the benefit of splitting this all up on a different layer, you could vary that exactly how you wanted. But I've gone for maybe not that much. Let's just back it off a little bit, like so. So if we turn this layer off, then you can see the effect like so. So we're color grading it and softening it a little bit at the same time. So David, well spotted. Now at the moment it looks a little bit kind of dog is kind of in front of a fake background somewhat, and again, chatting to Chris, he said he likes to try and make it so that the animal is leaping sort of, I guess, from dark to light. So we kind of want to create a vignette but make it look a little bit more believable as well. So my next plan is to kind of brighten this area a little bit if we can, and kind of darken the bottom corner and sort of do a radial at the same time as well. I said this was a bit challenging. So I'm going to make another new layer, and we're going to call this bright spot. And what I'm going to do, actually I'm going to fill this layer. So I'm going to right click and fill it. If I press M on the keyboard, then you can see that's a mask on the whole photo itself. So what I want to do is use a tool to just kind of brighten that area. Now on the layer below, I had background soften and color grade. So you could say, well, why don't you just punch a hole in that? But I kind of want to separate my bright spot out in case I want to vary the opacity later. So keeping all the edits separate means that I can go back through this and play around with the opacity a little bit as well if I wish. So for my bright spot, I'm going to do the opposite of what I did on the layer below and just brighten it somewhat as well. So probably that's as bright as I want to go. So now what I'm going to do is right click and say clear mask, like so. Grab my brush, make this nice and big and super soft and a nice low flow. And by lowering the flow, it's going to let me brush in gradually. So now what I want to do is just kind of brush loosely over here, a bit more up in the top right hand corner, just to kind of brighten this area a little bit as well. Now if I do too much, I can just bring the opacity down a touch, and if I turn this on and off, you can see what it's doing, like so. So I think I'd leave that. What I might do is grab my eraser, right click and make that a bit smaller, and I just don't want to brighten him too much. I'm just going to erase a bit of the mask I did. So if we do the same trick we did with the grayscale mask, and say display grayscale mask, then you can see the little bright spot I've made in the corner. That was the dog's head, because I don't want his fur to get too bright. As someone rightly said, you know, the detail is pretty amazing what we can see. I mean, it's a cracking action shot for sure. Focus dog, love it. So if we turn that layer on and off, that's given us like a little brightened bit in the corner, but he still looks a little bit like he's floating against this background. So my next action point on my notes is to make a radial mask. That's just going to kind of darken this corner down a little bit as well, and then this corner down as well, just to give kind of a creative vignette. So let's make a new layer, and I'm going to call this Radial Mask. Radial Mask. Grab our Radial Mask brush, which is this guy over here, and then draw from the center. This will give us a circle, but I want to kind of rotate it just by grabbing the middle line and then making sure it's roughly over the dog, and then feathering it a bit nicer as well. And if you grab the handles, then you can change the shape of it. So I say, if I press M now, you can see the kind of radial I'm going to get, which I think I'm pretty happy with. So again, I'll use brightness. I won't use exposure because it will make the darker areas even darker, whereas brightness is going to bring the midtones down, as you can see, like so. So just peering at my monitor, there's a reflection. Depending how far we want to go with that, I'm going to go with something like that, which I think isolates him nicely. So if I turn the radial mask on and off, you can see the change like so. Yes, Akshay, you can get to the hand tool just by pressing spacebar. So if you want to just use the hand tool, spacebar, same as Photoshop, that's actually a really handy shortcut, but I forget it as well. Okay, now checking my notes. He still looks like a little bit floating. I want him to go from dark to light. So I want to darken just this corner a bit. So what we're going to make with another adjustment layer is a bottom grad. So grab the gradient tool and I'm going to drag up from the corner to something like that. If I press M on the keyboard, you can see the mask. Might not be feathered enough, let's see. So now if I take my brightness down, that's just going to darken that corner a bit more. So he's kind of bursting out of the shadows. Let's just fix my crop a little bit. So he's bursting out of the shadows into the light kind of thing. Now the last thing that we have to do, or almost the last thing, is just play with the color a little bit. And I had long chats with Chris about this, and I haven't quite nailed his technique as well as I could. But in some of the discussions, you know, when we talked about high-end pet photography, which is a thing, and again, look at Chris's Instagram, it's got some fantastic shots on there. You know, color grading the sort of cinematic feel is really important. So right now his fur doesn't really kind of match what's going on with the background or that look and feel. So what we want to do is just make a layer that deals with the dog color tone. Now we could go anyway with the color tone, to be honest. So I'm going to make another new layer and we call this dog color, like so. And we've already got that mask. So we can right click and say copy mask from just dog. Now you might ask, well, why just don't I use that layer? Because on this layer, this was our clarity and contrast. So if I want to go back and just play with opacity a bit or a few other things, it's just nice to keep it separated. So if we press M on our keyboard, that's just this guy again. So I'll go to the advanced color editor and try and mimic what Chris taught me. So if I go to the advanced tab and use my color picker, and I'm just going to pick kind of, let's just go, it's not really quite the right color tone in here. So if I pick that, let's just expand that out. So that's going to grab all of pretty much the greenish tone, I guess, that we're seeing here. So now if I take the saturation down a touch and then pull the hue more in this direction, then we can kind of correct it a little better as well. So we do that again. Let's reset those sliders. So if we pull the saturation down a bit and take the hue in this direction, it just cleans it up a little bit more as well. Now I also experimented with the color balance tool, so we could say, well, in the midtones we could pretty much push, you know, the color in any direction. So if you have got a color cast that's been picked up, just go to the opposite direction in the color wheel. But I think hopefully what I've done with the color editor just kind of takes it out a bit, fits with the backgrounds a little bit better as well. But you've got all the sort of tunability in the world there to fix it however you want. Nearly, we're kind of there actually. So now what we can do is just go back through the various different layers and think, have we overdone anything or not? So that was our adding trees. If you remember, we could fill that bit in if you like. I did a slightly better job on the other edits, but spending a little bit more time getting it in nicely. Our heel layer was this guy down in the bottom corner who we've almost got rid of. We could always bring, doesn't work, changing the opacity. This is just our dog. That was clarity, just so we remember. So if we zoom in to 100%, we can actually go in a bit closer. So this was just adding a bit of clarity and contrast. So that's before and after, just so we can see all that frozen motion, if you like. Looks really super good. So again, let's turn that on and off. Next one, this was our color grading on the background. So background soften and color grade. So that was our negative clarity and structure to soften that up a bit. Or you could go the other way if you wanted to see more of the water droplets and so on. Then we had our bright spot, which was to just kind of lighten this corner a bit, which again, I might actually bring it up to the max. So if I think I could do a bit more, I could grab my brush again, right click, let's make it a bit smaller so I don't get his nose, and then we could just brighten up these areas a little bit as well, like so. So that was our bright spot, just so he's like got a bit of forward motion, not just vignetted. The radial mask was to darken off the background, so that looked like this, and then a further bottom grad down here just to kind of darken this corner a little bit more, so he's going from dark to light again. And finally a little color editor tweak just to take out that tinge and reduce the saturation a bit so it's more in line with the background as well. Andreas, yes, is color adjustment working only on the mask on the selected layer? Yeah, exactly. Now there's a chance that we could have done it on the background, but I think it would have interfered with the color grade that we already had with the tree line, so on and so forth. So it wasn't worth the risk doing it. And we already had the mask anyway, so it was easy just to copy the mask from something else and then just play around with the color editor, for example. Let's have a look at your other questions. After the layers mask, if I change the crop of the mask following the crop, keeping the proportions. Well, remember, I've only masked inside this area. So if we change the crop, like if we look at our masks, for example, so we do option M, so you can see what the masks look like. So there's in grayscale mask, bottom grad, radial mask, and so on. So I could change the crop a little bit, but obviously if I went outside of what I've done with my bright spot, then I'd probably need to add to it. But you can see how the masks look as we flip through. That's that guy in there, and there's our adding of trees like so. So yes and no. So you might have to do a little bit of mask fiddling if you dramatically change your crop afterwards as well. Let's see. Tom says blending layers would be awesome. Photoshop killer for sure. Well, who knows what comes in the future. I think adding the cloning and heal and things like the refine mask, which doesn't get a great deal of use, but it's really super useful. So all those kinds of things can work really, really nicely together to do more complex tasks like this as well and complete all of that in Capture One. And again, if you wanted to heal out some of the little water spots or whatever, then you could also do that on a healing layer, but I think they look pretty cool as they're like over the rest of his body. So personally, that's not something I would do. What I might do on the background is, because we've muted the frisbee a bit on our background layer, I could pick this color and then we could just give that maybe a bit more saturation. We could lighten it, darken it, whatever, but I think it just lost its saturation a tiny bit, like so. So not too bad. I thought I was going to struggle today, if I'm honest, to do that off the cuff. So that's the one I kind of did a few days ago, but without the color correction on the dog. So a little bit different. That's one I did this morning, a little bit different again, and that's the one we did just now. So it's really hard to match and edit day to day, but the process and what I did for each layer is much the same. Which one is the favorite? I don't know. I think I quite like this one actually, but it's exactly the same process, but I think the background looks a little bit nicer on this one. But there we go. Let's just have a look at a few more questions. Can we watch this again? Yes, of course. So as soon as the live broadcast is cut, you can just go back and rewind it on Facebook, on YouTube, wherever you are. That works fine. So yeah, and it will stay there as well. It's in a playlist on YouTube. You'll find them under the Quick Live playlist too. Let's see, Jeff. Could you subtract the mask from the dog to his bright spot layer so the dog is cut out of the mask? You subtract the mask. No, you couldn't. I'm not quite sure what you want to achieve with that, Jeff. But no, so you can't add different layers together. I think that's probably what you're looking for. So there is no way to combine two different layers together. Items that we didn't use were feather mask, which just softens the edges. If you're looking for extra options here, copy mask you saw as well, but there's no way to say blend two layers together and subtract or something like that. But it's a good question anyway. I think that was pretty good question wise. Let's say the shot with the crop make the dog look like it's flowing in space. Yeah, yeah. When you see the crop like this, it's looks kind of wacky for sure. But I hope you found that interesting today. If any questions come up afterwards, then we can always answer them on social media as well. Okay. Thanks for joining again today. Do check out Chris's Instagram. Thanks to Chris for lending me some photos to work with. There was a few others that I was going to have a try with as well. Again, super awesome quality straight out of the camera. But that's as far as I got with that one. I think I had a little play with this guy. So that's a different edit as well with a similar kind of principle of separating out the dog, playing with the background as well, trying to brighten a little bit, but I didn't get as far with that one as I did with this one. This guy was my focus to try and nail it for sure. Okay, thanks for joining us today on another quick live. Be sure to join us again in the future. Thursday, we have a webinar. You'll find it on our Learning Hub, learn.captureone.com. It's also scheduled on YouTube if you prefer to watch there. And that's with our ambassador guest, Tina Eisen, and she's going to talk about her self-portraiture workflow. Certainly over the past few months, we've only been able to capture ourselves. So she spoke about how she's managed to do that. Thanks everyone, and see you all again soon. Take care. Bye now.